It's Martin time again. Just can't keep them away. We've got them both young and old this week. Can't be sure, but I think these should be good illustratively to go into such topics as heat and humidity, which is very topical, the ethical paradox that can come about when you're repairing exceptionally valuable vintage guitars, and we're going to talk a little about repair techniques from the past that seemed completely sane at the time, but in retrospect are absolutely bonkers. To start off with, we've got a 2012 D-18. It's a perennial favorite. It's the dreadnought all other dreadnoughts aspire to be. This one is in pretty reasonable shape. There is a bit of an issue with a little bit of buzzing if you hit the strings in the right spot. And it's not fret buzz. There's plenty of clearance over the next few frets in line. And the action on this guitar is quite high. This is something to mention. This guitar is 13 years old, and the action is, it's a bit more than we'd like to see. You know, it's higher than I would expect to see on a guitar of this age. The owner says he thinks it was subjected to some serious heat at one point, and that might be true. Well, it's currently 38 degrees Celsius here in the city today, which is 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Although with the humidity, it feels like 46, which is like, what, 118 or something Fahrenheit? This is the kind of weather that guitars do not do well in. If you were to take, even in a case, put your instrument in a hot car like this, it could start the day off with perfect action. After 6 or 7 hours, you know, you might end up needing a neck reset. The changes can be that profound, and sometimes irrevocable. Say I'd like to play some notes in first position on the D string. The open string is good and clear. There's no buzzing happening there, so this is not an issue with a nut slot. However, if I try to play E, or F, and to a lesser extent F sharp, did you hear that little rebounding effect? There's the initial attack, and then there's a rebounding little buzz. That'll drive you nuts. Now, we might suspect that, well, you've got a high fret there. Oh, and I checked to make sure it had nothing to do with reverberation from the Velociraptor claw on a friendship bracelet. But the frets in this area are level. There's no rocking. And I know the guy who dressed them last, and he's pretty fastidious. Is it a matter of not enough clearance over subsequent frets? No. This guitar has high action, remember? Neck relief, 6/1000 of an inch. That's right on the money. So this is an odd phenomenon. It can be very frustrating. Sometimes it's related to one of two different things. It's not so much that the string itself is vibrating against a high fret, but there can be a fret that is loose in its slot. And when you stop the string on that fret, there can be enough energy put into it via the string to basically wiggle it back and forth and create a kind of oscillation. It's a reverberant kind of situation. So that's one thing. If you've got loose frets, there can be weird buzzes. The other thing that can happen, and this is especially true of guitars that get played hard, is a little groove will form in the top of the saddle under the string, and over time that'll widen. In this situation, the buzzing is going to be located in 2 or 3 successive frets that are level, so it makes no sense. But what's happening is that by pressing the string down, we're forming like a low right triangle. It's an acute angle with the top of the saddle. And the string is the hypotenuse. That angle is variable depending on which fret we're pressing down, but there can be a sweet spot where that angle aligns with the groove, or the angle of the groove in the saddle. And if it's flat enough, there'll be a takeoff point, and in front of it there'll not be adequate clearance between the string and the saddle. and we get that sitar effect. The string will be literally bouncing against it. Something similar can happen with Stratocaster saddles, by the way, but often it'll be over a larger number of frets because the saddles are lower in their relationship to the plane of the frets, usually, so more of them can be affected. As a repair person, once you learn this, life becomes quite a lot easier. Looking at this bridge, talking about funny little buzzes, can you see that there is a crack which is formed between the bridge pin holes? Doesn't extend out into the field beyond that. That little hairline there can be enough sometimes to cause funny sounds, so we're definitely going to fix that. So the string action on this guitar, on the bass side, is just a hair under 8/64ths. It's about 120 thousandths or 3 millimeters. On the treble side, it is like 6.5 64ths. 100 thousandths, 2.5 millimeters, which is getting up to the point where most people will be quite uncomfortable, playing fast anyway. The saddle exposure, its height over the top surface of the bridge, is very good. I don't think it's ever been cut down, and it's, again, a hair under 1/8 of an inch. It's about 3 millimeters tall, which, is what you would really like to see. And also the strings are being carried above the surface of the soundboard at a really optimal 1/2 inch. That's exactly what you want from a dreadnought. Now, there's probably enough room on this saddle for me to lower it to get really desirable action. However, I'd be removing just a hair over 1/16 of an inch in height, which is going to leave us less than 1/16 of an inch worth of saddle showing over the top, which, on some guitars we make it work. In this case, the owner is not willing to compromise on that. So we are looking at a neck reset on a guitar that is 12 or 13 years old. Ordinarily, I expect to see Martins 25 years, sometimes 30. Also, there's this thing, which Martin has become quite renowned for in recent years. Whatever adhesive they're using to stick their binding on tends to fail over time. And this has been glued up once before, but it did not hold. In this case, there's not a whole lot of stress on this binding in this area. Oftentimes the gap can be quite big. And if you leave it for a long time, it only gets bigger and more difficult to close. Oftentimes we have to loosen the binding around half the guitar and sort of shift it to make it stick, but I think we'll be able to get that to close up. Let's have a look at the area around the D string here. You can see the groove is not excessively long, but it could be flat enough to cause the issue. So if you're traveling with your guitar on a hot day, it makes sense to detune it and take some of the tension off. I know it's annoying, but take comfort that you're not a lute player. But virtually all factory guitars made since the 70s, even the super high quality ones, use a polyvinyl adhesive. It's a woodworking glue for assembly, and that stuff is great in a lot of ways, but you can think of it like an amorphous solid. Even when it's cool, even when it's cured, it has a structure that is kind of in between solid and liquid, and over long periods of time and pressure it can creep. And glue that's over, say, 95 degrees Fahrenheit, 35 Celsius, it accelerates to the point where parts can actually slide. And when they cool back down, they'll be locked in their new position. The top can actually slide over the braces in the area of the joint of the fingerboard to the body, etc. So maybe take it down to a C. It's the same for flying, Maybe they won't let you take the guitar on as a carry-on. It's summer in Phnom Penh, and you're waiting in your seat watching your guitar case sitting on a baggage trolley in the sun for 45 minutes while they fix some little issue with the plane. That's enough to do it. Interestingly, hide glue, even though we use heat to activate it, is not so susceptible once it's dry and cured. It's much more crystalline in structure. It doesn't flow in the same way, doesn't creep. But saying that, humidity along with the heat is a big problem. glue lines such as on the bridge, sometimes the edge of the fingerboard, braces inside. Those can absorb enough humidity from the atmosphere. And if it's hot, you can also have problems with hide glue. So heat and humidity, not your guitar's friend. Foam cutters from hotwirefoamfactory.com. Things got warm, getting some wiggles, that's exciting, except, oh, the binding is moving with. Gotta be careful. Contemporary Martins have so much information. Stickers, more stickers, written stuff, numbers, letters. We'll make some frightening black dust, sprinkle it around someone's baseboards and tell them, oh, black mold. No, don't do that. That's mean. We'll sprinkle some in the cracks as if I was a coal dust fairy from some Welsh colliery cautionary tale for young children. Well, lad, what did the coal fairy bring you this year? Coal dust. Ah, lucky boyo. There is no culture that instills good behavior with superglue. Well, that turned out okay. You can't fool kids with the prospect of sanding either. I'm using canopy glue to stick the binding back on. It's a product designed for use in making like remote control cars and such. Dries clear, it's water-based. I've had mixed results, but it seems to work really good on Martin binding. So we'll give it a shot here. Luckily, the felt marker penetrates deep enough that I won't lose the valuable information even though I have to sand off all of the previous glue residue. I need to get it off the underside of the extension as well. This is very definitely an aliphatic resin. Yes, Martin is a little more naughty these days by coating the end of their heel with glue as well as the tenon on the dovetail. I'll increase the neck angle by doing the sandpaper pulling procedure. I'm going to make a new nut. In cases where we have an undersaddle pickup, we don't want a super tight fit. It should slide in and out and be removable easily. Shouldn't be able to lift the guitar off the bench this time. We'll find the intonation places and file it to suit. And there we have it. The new saddle is about the same size as the old, but the action is now 25% lower. Here we have a rather similar guitar. The other one had a rosewood body, while this is just mahogany. It's kind of beat up too. Which one would you choose? This is a D-18 from 1940. Does that change your mind? Yes, this makes it a pre-war Martin Dreadnought, which is one of the most highly prized and collectible instruments in the world. This is one of only 377. Made in 1940. Like most of these guitars, it's had something of a history. One of the main reasons it's in today is the bridge here in the back end is lifting off the soundboard. This, I believe, is probably a replacement bridge. There are witness marks around it from previous reglues. It's well made, but the owner notes that the front edge here doesn't seem quite as rounded. Saying that, I think it has been on the guitar for a long time. You can see that string ramps have been cut between the pinholes in the back of the saddle. That's usually done to increase brake angle when the saddle has been cut down to basically nothing. It's, a means of lowering the action to the very minimum before having to do something. Here's an interesting thing. This has had a neck reset. There's a fairly substantial wedge under the fretboard extension here. In looking at the size or the height of the heel here, it seems pretty clear to me that material was removed. In terms of action height, it's just bang on. Exactly where you'd want to see it. One of these guitars in the middle of summer, 6/64 on the bass side, 4.5 on the treble. These guitars tend to move quite a bit seasonally, and because they don't have a drop-in saddle, these through saddles here, they're more difficult to work on. They're usually, and they should be, glued in place. And more often than not, if you want to reduce the action height, you're cutting stuff off the top of them. So it's not a procedure that, we take lightly. And just in general, basically learn to play it with the action that it has. So in this case, the neck geometry and the action is exactly where we want it. Neck resetting as a procedure is fairly new. For about 40 years now, give or take, it's been accomplished with steam, more recently with dry heat methods. But for a period of time before that, a portion of the fretboard extension would be cut through, oftentimes at the 14th fret, and that would allow access to the dovetail. Hot water would be poured in there to loosen it. That's always been a slightly unsatisfying experience because it opens up a can of worms and it causes as many problems as it solves usually, because the guitar wants to fold up at this point. If you sent a guitar with high action to Martin for repair in the 50s and 60s, they might put a new neck on it if it was really bad, but that's pretty costly for them. The other way that they could lower the action would be to pull the frets and then plane the fretboard thinner at the headstock ends to create a ramp upwards toward the body. You've seen me do that on a couple of classical guitars in the past, and recently for Justine's electric upright bass about a month ago or so. That can gain you a millimeter or more in action reduction. And so if you pair that with a thinner than usual bridge, away you go, And I think that's what happened with this guitar. Look at the fretboard and see how close the side dots are to its upper surface. In fact, you can see them from the front, sort of, which suggests that there was some funny stuff going on here. The other thing is the fretboard curves inward to a degree I'm not used to. Like there's a bit of a recurve, it comes around to meet the top. I have more experience with Martins from the teens and the 20s than I do from the 30s, early 40s. But this seems to be part of the operation here. I'm pretty sure it was worked on. I sometimes come across people disparaging this kind of thing as a hack job online, but you must put it into perspective. These guitars were not built to be taken apart. Martin basically suggested that it was impossible, and to do this in a relatively non-destructive way took a very long time to develop, and the process is still undergoing changes as recently as this decade, right? So, was this the wrong way to do things? It's what the high-quality craftsmen at Martin came up with. And in 1967, they'd use this to make your guitar playable again, and you'd probably be happy about it. Let's have a look inside. Scalloped braces, all very neat and tidy. Well, that doesn't look so tidy. That's some glue residue and squeeze out that's kind of uncharacteristic for Martin, and this probably came from the time it had the neck reset. Oftentimes with steam, the neck block itself will come loose from the soundboard and need to be re-glued, and this is just sort of pushed in there with a spatula. Uh-oh, here's trouble. This is a bridge plate overlay. There are a number of reasons why it may have been introduced. The simplest would be the pinholes could just be worn out. There could be a crack in the plate, and maybe it's an attempt to stiffen things up and act like a cleat. Maybe it was just needed to keep the ends of the string windings from coming up and over a saddle after the bridge had been planed down. We don't know. We can't know. What we do know is Martin nerds who buy, sell, and trade guitars in this category hate these things. It offends them deeply. Sometimes they'll fall to their knees, they'll tear out their hair and scream, "Aye, why, why?" One of the previous people who re-glued the bridge did not have padding on their clamp ends. Go and do that right now. The fact that it goes from end to end is concerning and a little bit weird. This appears to be made from model maker's birch ply, which is very thin. It's probably a 1/16 of an inch, multi-ply cross-grain laminate core. And, it's probably a decent material for this job, but still, it fills me with dread. I'm going to start by taking the bridge off for re-gluing, and you can see there have been a number of attempts, probably different bridges at various points. So again, we don't know what's under this bridge either. Could be any number of horrors within. So now we have to discuss the vagaries of working on a precious antique instrument of tremendous cultural importance and the role in which a repair person is cast. This guitar is very playable. The hard truth, though, is at this point in history, this thing is kind of moving from the realm of playable instrument into a purely collectible item. People in the market for these, the only ones who can really afford them, tend to have a fetish for originality, though. That is completely at odds with what these things have been doing for the last 90 years, you know? Constant playing is a destructive process. It can't remain original. Stuff breaks down, it wears. And the truth is, the number of these that get played on a regular basis is very small and shrinking year by year. And in some ways, it's almost unfair to ask a repair person to try and keep them playable while maintaining originality, you know? They've all needed neck resets. They all have bridges that have been shifted or been re-glued or new saddles. They all have pickguard cracks that have been repaired. None of them is really in pristine condition. But we get people who inspect the bridge plates, you know, very carefully. Guess what? Every bridge plate in a guitar that's been played for 85 years is going to exhibit wear, you know? This one has had an overlay. That's on there for a reason. It was an honest attempt to deal with an issue. The demand for originality now has us removing overlays because they're bad. But once they're gone, I've got to fix whatever was under there. And to do that, I'm going to have to remove some original wood to insert maple plugs around the pinholes. There's some people who fill with epoxy. This customer's not interested in that. But in any case, we're going to be removing some original wood. In some ways, an overlay is more conservative, right? You know, this guitar also sounds fantastic with the overlay. Well, the closest analogy that I can think of are the old Cremonese violins. Stradivari, Guarnerius, that kind of stuff. Those still need to be played every day, but they're acknowledged as precious artifacts. All of them have been heavily modified from the way they left the shop. All of them are a patchwork of old and new wood, 2 centuries worth of repairs. And the violin world has come to an understanding that every once in a while, wood's going to have to come out and be replaced if they're going to remain functional. So even though we attach extreme values to the originality, function is still important. But if you've got a 1930s Martin steel string, should you have it repaired at all? Or are we going to enter a preservation mode on this stuff? We've got loud voices in the collector community on both sides of that aisle. You know, they need to be played so that people can hear them and understand how great they are, but they must remain completely original and never ever change. The original plate, all of it, or what's left of it, is still in there. But we've got Schrodinger's crack. If I take off the overlay, we're going to know for sure. And if there is a crack there that runs from side to side, that bridge plate is going to come out, and we're going to lose the originality. So, yeah, it's a nail-biter for me. It's also a philosophical issue that only the owners of each of these guitars can answer. And I'm not sure there's really a consensus at this point. Okay, this is interesting. To the underside of the bridge was glued this veneer. The grain runs in the same direction as the bridge itself, so cross grain to the top. And it seems to be mahogany or something similar, just a standard thickness of veneer. The reason, I don't know. It's not like there's a whole lot of missing material on the top here. It's all fairly flat. We still got the original score marks from when they roughed up the surface for better glue adhesion. Maybe they just wanted an extra 0.5 millimeter of height on their bridge. I don't know. I've never seen it before. I know I'm not going to recreate this when I glue it back on. To pull out the bridge plate overlay, I'm going to get out my little spatula here, which has been bent. It's got a thin blade, but it's very stiff. Perfect for the task. I clamp my electric heating blanket to the overlay, let it warm up, and I can pry on it. It takes maybe 10 minutes to warm up, and I get maybe 2 minutes worth of prying time. And this took a very long time. It took 5 different heats to get the thing to come off. It's not hide glue, and I don't know what kind of adhesive it was. If you do this frequently enough, you develop a callus. And there it is. It's like its own miniature bridge pad. I don't know why it's this shape. So we're down to the maple plate. And it doesn't look bad. A couple of the holes are maybe a little bit large, but this is serviceable. For the holes that are wallowed out, I'll use my purpose-built homemade plug cutter that operates from outside the guitar to cut some little recesses about 50 thousandths deep, which will accept some maple plugs. I'll cook up some fresh hide glue. After I glued in the plugs, I'll glue on the bridge. I'm not shy about the quantity of hide glue. Better more than too little. And get that all clamped together. You got to work fast. Got about a minute. The owner put some new, old, well, appropriate to the era tuners on this thing, and some of the screw holes need plugging. I'm noticing there's quite a quantity of oil. You want to be careful not to allow that to soak into the bare wood. Problems can arise. Even pre-war guitars need polishing, polishing, polishing. Here's what the maple inserts look like. They're less offensive to certain sensibilities. Okay, all set. It was a lot of work. I'm not sure I'm even done yet. You'll recall that 1/2 millimeter piece of veneer that was under the bridge? Well, without that, the action drops down, of course, and we're currently sitting at an absolutely dreamy just over 5/64 on the bass side, 4 even on the treble, which is fine right now at the end of June. Come December, it might end up being too low. No truss rod in these guitars, and thin tops, and they move. So, got to do a bit of a conference and see whether I'm going to make a new saddle now or later. And maybe we just let it go like it is and see if everything pans out. But, that being said, making a new saddle for this, as I mentioned previously, because they're glued in and because they have this beautifully elegant shape to them, which means that you can't take material off the bottom without making them too narrow for the slot that they're in, means generally it takes about twice as long to make one of these than it does a drop-in saddle. Beautiful guitar, not for everyone. And like I say, there's a certain level of responsibility that comes with owning these things that is kind of beyond musicianship and into conservatorship.